No, it's fantastic to be mentoring at your age. Just on the other side of robotics, one of the challenges we're seeing within robotics going forward is the social change. What does it mean in terms of displacing jobs? How does that impact on society? What are you seeing there, and what are governments doing to kind of maybe mitigate some of that risk?
It's a great question. So let's dispel a few myths first. And the first is that robots will replace humans, everyone, everywhere. That's just not going to happen. And we know that because there are certain tasks that are suited to robotics, and there are certain tasks that are not. So for example, if you have a high volume, repetitious task that is always consistently the same, then it makes sense to deploy robotics. And depending on the necessary relatability of a human or an object to that task depends on whether or not it needs to be a humanoid, whether or not it needs to be a robot such as this one, whether or not it could be a hologram actually delivering that service, or whether or not it could be physically a chatbot or something similar that delivers that type of service. And then on the other side, we need to think about the human elements, right? Because you certainly would not want to be receiving, for example, advice that you were dying of cancer, for example, from a robot. And so there are certain tasks where, one, the amount of complexity is significant. It's not always the same task. And second is that there is a great deal of empathy or human contact needed in that engagement. And so we have to differentiate very clearly around what tasks can be used for automation robotics and what tasks will consistently remain human. And particularly those tasks that have high levels of creativity or ambiguity around them. And then what are governments and policymakers doing to step in? I think they're doing a number of things. So I sit as an expert panelist on the EU 2020, where we have an additional 40 billion euros to invest. So one is they're making funds available for inventors like Ashib and others to really get started on this journey of disruption. Two is they're spending an inordinate amount of money to educate and engage community members. Take, for example, drivers, truck drivers, taxi drivers, bus drivers. Autonomous vehicles are already on the road. Those jobs are at some point in the future going to be displaced. And people are proactively thinking about how do they redeploy these workers and what skills can they give them. The other fallacy that we need to dismiss is that there is a finite number of jobs in the marketplace that are to be carved up for all humans. That's merely a fallacy. In fact, when you deploy automation and robotics, often that pie grows considerably larger. And we've seen that over time, right? Since agriculture and manufacturing to now people being in largely office-based roles, and the amount of funds being created from an economic prosperity perspective being significantly larger than it was ever before. So we must consider that when we add robotics and automation, that actually the pie that we all share can be exponentially larger in terms of domestic output. But secondly, that in fact, when we look at the jobs of the future, not only does the pie grow larger, but the types of jobs that will exist in the future, the types of roles that will exist in the future will be considerably different. And so being able to redeploy requires transferable skills, because we don't necessarily know what those skills are going to be for the future. And as an adjunct professor at a university, we play a specific role, supported by government, in ensuring that our graduates of the future have those transferable skills that can be used.
Okay, Leesa, couldn't we just all go to a 3-day-a-week, draw the same salary, and there'd be 20% more jobs? Wouldn't that work?
You know, there is a fallacy in some parts of Europe that there should be a minimum wage, and in fact I think it's being trialled in many parts of the world that everyone receives a minimum wage. I come from Australia, where people are given an unemployment benefit. I haven't seen that necessarily produce a desire to work. And so I think certainly depending on the jobs or industries that exist in a country, they might be more or less affected than others. But I think we need to think very smartly about how we deploy handing out wages in return for no work.
Rashid, from your point of view, students you work with, youngsters coming up looking for their future career, are they concerned about what jobs are going to be available and the fact that some of the simpler jobs are perhaps not going to be available to them?
I think at least the people around me, if you're thinking that the simple jobs are not going to be available, that's a good thing. And at least my friends are, because we always have these discussions in class about how you want to do this, but that job is not even going to be available for you. There's probably going to be a machine doing it. So we do look at it from that angle, and I think that's pretty good because we are made to think. We're not made to just do the same thing again and again. So in such a scenario, if we're trying to get into fields where we need to think, I think it's better. Many of my friends took up psychology this year because they thought that was something that they can get jobs in the future, rather than just going into something like accounting where they might not necessarily have jobs later.
And when you look at the education you receive, what we have to think about is we've got to educate people for jobs that don't exist yet. Do you think you're receiving enough kind of problem-solving skills, creativity, innovation kind of training, or is that kind of left to you to do out of school?
I think it's more something that we have to outsource, not something that's being given to us at schools. There are very few schools. I won't say that there are no schools giving it. There are some schools that are providing it, but the numbers are very small. I mean, you still have the standardized tests that everyone has to pass in, and even if you have problem-solving questions in those tests, everyone just looks at past papers where they're the same questions. They learn answers to them and they attempt the test. So, as such, I think thinking is quite less in the current education system. But I think they're working towards it. But
yeah, I think it's important to give people a desire to kind of find their own way through that creative process, and that has to change in the way we have to kind of rethink quite a lot about the way people are educated, I guess.
Yeah, and just to share, I'm from Singapore Management University, and at Singapore Management University we've recently added critical thinking to the agenda. We have masters versus robots. Where do we deploy humans? Where do we deploy robots? Where can we work together? And understanding the frameworks and the theory that sits around that helps us to make more educated decisions in the workplace. And I think just the fundamental scenario analysis capabilities, right? In the past, we tended to teach from a textbook and deliver black and white answer type question and answer. And now today we're saying, okay, here is the scenario. Here is a number of critical thinking tools that you could use in this process. There is no right answer, but let's together look at what are the fors and the against, what's the root cause, what are the consequences, and what are the legal, ethical, acceptable, defendable, and sensible outcomes that we can expect from this particular scenario.
Yeah, so it's kind of developing new processes. Last question to both of you. I'm going to start with you. What's next for you? What's the next stage with your career, and what are the kind of barriers that you see as challenges to you fulfilling your potential?
I think as of now I look at resources as a barrier for me. I mean, finding resources is always pretty hard as a student. I mean, development is fun in these fields, but it's also expensive, right? So, that's one of the major challenges, getting the right resources. And I think going ahead, I'll say the same way, we continue thinking and coming up with new things and better things. They make things cheaper for others and for yourself.
So, Leesa, if you were mentoring, what direction would you be pushing him in?
Oh, what direction? I would ask yourself 3 questions.
Right.
So first is, what is it that I want to be? Therefore, what do I need to do? And therefore, what does that allow me to have? Many people of youth today say, what is it that I can have? Therefore, what should I do? And therefore, what do I need to be?
But do it
and
the other
way
around.
If you do it the other way around, I think you'll live your purpose, and obviously you want to make a difference. So I wish you all the very best, and let me know how I can help you with that.
Yes, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much for talking to me. Really interesting debate. Hope you enjoy the rest of the show, and hope we can talk again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
you.